Consider a scenario where your entire existence hinges on the happiness of a single individual. Not merely your employment or social standing, but your very life itself. Now envision that this individual is the most formidable sovereign on the planet. A person who possesses the power to determine the destinies of millions with just one utterance. This may seem like a plot from a Netflix series, yet for countless young men in ancient China, this was their harsh reality. In the splendid realm of Imperial China, interpersonal relationships functioned in a manner vastly different from contemporary times. While we navigate dating applications in search of affection, or at the very least, engaging dialogue, ancient Chinese emperors engaged in something significantly more intricate and perilous. It is well known that the illustrious concubines and empresses residing in the Forbidden City have been immortalized in numerous films and television series. However, there exists a more somber and obscured narrative that historical texts often overlook. The sorrowful fates of male concubines who served the most powerful rulers of China. For over 2 millennia, Chinese emperors did not solely surround themselves with enchanting women, they also maintained handsome young men as close companions, lovers, and confidants. These were not merely casual relationships or fleeting affairs. We are discussing fully developed romantic partnerships that had the potential to influence the destinies of entire dynasties. These young men, referred to as Nanchong or Nanchong in Chinese, led lives that render contemporary celebrity drama akin to mere children's playground gossip. Consider the most toxic relationship you have ever observed. Perhaps it was that friend who entirely altered their personality for someone who treated them poorly. Or that couple where one individual wielded all the power while the other tiptoed around them every single day. Now amplify that dynamic 1,000-fold. Introduce life or death stakes and place it in a realm from which there is absolutely no escape. This was the existence of male concubines in ancient China. However, before we delve into their world of silk robes and gilded cages filled with passionate love affairs that culminated in tragedy, I must caution you, this narrative does not conclude happily. In fact, it is so unsettling that it will forever alter your perception of power and relationships. If you are prepared to uncover the dark secrets that Chinese history endeavored to conceal, continue watching. Believe me, you will be astonished by what transpired next. To grasp just how outrageous this entire system was, we must set aside all preconceived notions about relationships and immerse ourselves in the mindset of ancient China. Imagine existing in a realm where your romantic endeavors are not centered around discovering your soulmate or merely enjoying oneself. Instead, they revolve around survival, political maneuvering, and the urgent task of preventing an entire empire from disintegrating. In contemporary relationships, we find ourselves debating who should cover the dinner bill or whose responsibility it is to wash the dishes. In contrast, historical relationships were strategic moves on an expansive chessboard where a single misstep could ignite a conflict. For Chinese emperors, marriage was devoid of romantic sentiment. It resembled the signing of a business agreement. The emperor entered into matrimony primarily for political alliances, to appease influential families, and, most crucially, to ensure the birth of male heirs capable of sustaining the dynasty. The notion of romance was as pertinent as inquiring whether your arranged marriage partner had access to your Netflix account. Now here's where it becomes intriguing. The emperor was regarded as the son of heaven, literally believed to be selected by the divine to govern all beneath the heavens. This was not merely a grand title. The populace sincerely thought that his emotional state could influence agricultural yields, precipitation, and the overall prosperity or decline of the empire. Thus, when the emperor experienced joy, the entire realm shared in that happiness. Conversely, when he faced stress, depression, or anger, it was perceived as an impending cosmic catastrophe. This scenario fostered the ideal conditions for the existence of male concubines. The emperor's spouse, the empress, was selected through committees and political necessity, essentially representing the epitome of an arranged marriage. Her role was to appear dignified during ceremonies and, ideally, to bear princes. However, what about the emperor's genuine emotional and physical requirements? What of companionship, stimulating dialogue, or simply having someone who truly cared for him as an individual rather than as a mere political figure? This is where the male favorites come into play. Unlike the empress, who arrived with her own political motives and familial obligations, these individuals, young men, possessed no external allegiances. They were not present to enhance their family's political standing or to secure commercial agreements. Their existence was solely for the emperor's personal gratification, rendering them both immensely valuable and exceedingly vulnerable. The selection process was a blend of randomness and strategy. Imperial scouts traversed the empire in search of boys who exhibited the ideal mix of beauty, intellect, and that elusive quality that might captivate an emperor's attention. Occasionally, it was the son of a farmer whose remarkable features distinguished him at a local festival. At other times, it was a young scholar whose cleverness and charm captivated a visiting official. Once selected, their previous lives ceased instantly. Within days, these boys found themselves in accommodations more opulent than they had ever envisioned. They donned silk robes worth more than their family's earnings over several years, indulged in delicacies crafted by the empire's most skilled chefs, and rested on beds carved from precious woods. Servants who had once attended to the emperor's forebears now catered to their every whim. They had attained what every ambitious individual in China aspired to: direct access to the Son of Heaven. However, this elevation came at a cost that became apparent only when it was too late to flee. The palace walls, as beautiful as they were, became their everlasting confines. No correspondence home, no family visits, no ties to the world they had once inhabited. Their former identities vanished, supplanted by new names bestowed by the emperor. Their pasts became inconsequential, existing solely to fulfill imperial desires. Each day ushered in the same harsh uncertainty. They could awaken to discover that the emperor had lost interest in them. They discovered someone younger and more beautiful, or perhaps simply decided that the previous individual was no longer entertaining. Their education was entirely centered on amusement, learning to play instruments that could soothe the emperor's moods, memorizing poetry that might elicit a smile from him, and mastering conversations that could engage his interest for extended periods. The relentless pressure was intolerable. They existed with the knowledge that their entire lives hinged on remaining captivating to someone who possessed everything in the world. The most renowned love story in Chinese imperial history commenced with a simple act that would resonate through the ages. Emperor Ai of the Han dynasty had fallen profoundly in love with a young man named Dong Xian, whose beauty and gentle disposition had utterly enchanted the ruler. One afternoon, as they rested together, the emperor awoke to find Dong Xian peacefully asleep on his silk sleeve. Rather than disturb his beloved, Emperor Ai meticulously cut off his own sleeve, permitting Dong Xian to continue sleeping undisturbed. This tender moment gave rise to the phrase, the passion of the cut sleeve, which became a poetic expression for same-sex love in Chinese literature for centuries. However, the romance that appeared so beautiful on the surface was destined for inevitable tragedy. Emperor Ai lavished Dong Xian with honors that astonished the entire court. He elevated Dong Xian's family members to prominent positions, constructed a palace for him that rivaled the emperor's own, and most scandalously began to suggest that he might designate Dong Xian as his heir. Rather than adhering to traditional succession laws, the courtroom was filled with outrage. Traditional Confucian scholars were appalled that a male favorite could exert such power over imperial decisions impacting millions. They murmured that the emperor had lost his sanity, prioritizing personal desires over the dynasty's stability. The dissent grew increasingly loud and perilous with each day that passed. When Emperor Ai unexpectedly passed away at the young age of 25, Dong Xian's world crumbled in an instant. The new Empress Daja, who had long harbored resentment towards his influence, commanded his immediate expulsion from the court. All of his titles were revoked, his wealth seized, and his family members were removed from their roles. Confronted with inevitable disgrace and likely execution, Dong Xian made the only decision he believed was left to him. Rather than face the humiliation and torture that awaited him, he chose to end his own life. The cycle of intense love followed by profound loss recurred throughout Chinese history, claiming countless young lives. The aftermath left a profound impact on these young men. The psychological burden they bore was catastrophic in ways that ancient texts merely suggest. Physicians in the palace noted unusual ailments among male favorites, including enigmatic fevers, abrupt weight loss, and what we would now identify as severe depression and anxiety. Many resorted to alcohol or opium to dull the persistent fear and solitude. Some succumbed to madness due to the overwhelming pressure, conversing with themselves in vacant rooms or refusing sustenance for extended periods. The most brutal element was not the opulence or even the confinement itself. It was the utter obliteration of their humanity. They existed solely as extensions of the emperor's will, devoid of independent thoughts, desires, or prospects. Court documents recount young men who lost their original names, who could not recall their families' faces, who had been so completely reshaped into imperial playthings that they forfeited all awareness of who they had been previously. When dynasties shifted, the slaughter was rapid and ruthless. Male favorites were deemed too perilous to remain alive. They had been close to the previous ruler, possessed state secrets, and could potentially incite opposition forces. During the collapse of the Ming dynasty in 1644, numerous male concubines confronted execution squads. Some opted for poison rather than capture. Others leaped from palace walls to evade the torture chambers of the advancing forces. Even those who endured dynastic upheavals encountered a fate worse than death: total historical erasure. While female concubines and empresses were documented in imperial genealogies, male favorites were systematically expunged from official records. Their names vanished from court chronicles. Their contributions were overlooked, and their very existence was negated by subsequent historians who deemed their narratives embarrassing or inconvenient. Centuries of Chinese historical texts were meticulously cleansed of their existence. It was as if these thousands of young men had never existed, never experienced love, and never endured suffering. They transformed into ghostly tales murmured in the corridors of palaces. Their tragic destinies served as cautionary tales for others who might pursue imperial favor at such a dire cost. In contemporary times, as we navigate social media and observe influencers fervently pursuing viral fame or witness reality TV personalities doing anything for attention, we are observing echoes of the same perilous game that led to the downfall of these young men centuries ago. The mediums have evolved, yet the intrinsic human yearning for power, acknowledgement, and the readiness to sacrifice everything for a fleeting moment in the limelight remains hauntingly similar. These overlooked male concubines of ancient China were not merely victims of a harsh system. They were casualties of the most toxic relationship imaginable, where love was wielded as a weapon and intimacy morphed into a death sentence. Their narratives unveil something unsettling about human nature: how effortlessly we can persuade ourselves that being selected by someone influential renders us special, even when that selection is accompanied by unseen shackles. The most haunting aspect is not solely the manner of their demise, but rather the extent to which they were obliterated from existence. Envision a life lived with such intensity, brimming with fervor and dread, opulence and hopelessness, only to have history act as if you were never there. Their names were erased from documents, their likenesses removed from monuments, their very being considered too unsettling for future generations to recognize. Yet, their narratives persisted in hushed tones and remnants, in poetry encoded and legal records that evaded detection. They serve as a reminder that even within the most magnificent empires of history, there were always individuals who paid the ultimate cost for the ambitions of others. Their sorrowful existences compel us to reflect on what we are prepared to forfeit for power, for affection, for the facade of uniqueness. In a realm where influence and connections to the powerful continue to dictate fates, these ancient misfortunes resonate with a surprisingly contemporary relevance. The participants may have shifted, but the game endures, still claiming its victims. What are your thoughts? Are we still engaged in the same perilous games today, albeit with altered rules? Please share your insights in the comments below.